The few and the proud tonight here. I had a well, I got an appointment Friday, so you might keep me in your prayers a little bit this next couple days. See how that goes. At 8:30 in the morning in Oklahoma City, so you might keep me in my prayers because I got to get up before dawn on Friday. That ain't right either. All right, we started to start on this last week a little bit, and kind of got caught up on some things probably, but when we start talking about the wedding in Cana, you know, there's a lot of things here that people try to read into this, and maybe more than we should. I've heard everything about this from, you know, whether it was alcoholic or grape juice to whether this was, you know, whether this was sort of certifying marriage to, you know, Jesus' mother's role in this, and you know why was she involved in this at all, and how was she related, and we don't have that answer. This is a feast, and in the Bible, this is the only wedding feast we have. We do have one in an apocryphal book, Tobiah. We have a wedding feast in that, but as far as in our Bible, a canon of scripture that we have, this is the only one of these that's mentioned. It was there is a lot here, and we'll try to kind of get through this a little bit this evening. It was an invitation. This was an invitation. You know, it wasn't. They didn't just show up. They didn't crash the party. And it wasn't just Jesus that was invited. His disciples were also invited to come to this wedding with him. So, you know, that's kind of interesting because that's kind of a big deal. This is in Cana. Cana is in a mountainous, kind of the mountainous country of Galilee. Jesus is going to go to Capernaum after this, which is down by the sea. But there was a reason they went to here purposefully. They were invited to go to this. Obviously, somebody they knew, a family they were involved with. There was a lot of relation involved within this group of people, and so this was an invitation. But Jesus' mother was involved, and there's a lot of speculation about why. You know, why was she worried about it? What did she have to do with it? The idea that, you know, she somehow thought she needed to fix this. She needed to find a way to fix it. And so she went to Jesus, and she made this statement, right? They have no wine. They've ran out of wine, right? This was a mountainous country. You know, this is a big thing. This is a big feast. It was real, according, I guess, into that culture, what I've read about this, for you to run out of anything. These feasts would sometimes go on for 5 to 7 days. This wasn't like what we do. This wasn't a one-night thing. These were day-long events. And apparently it was real disgraceful to run out. You know, you didn't want to run out. It was a real disgraceful thing if you didn't provide enough for all the people that were there. And it comes off really harsh. And I think all of my life, before I kind of knew to look at the language and look at things, it always came off really, really harsh. Well, what does that have to do with us? You know? And it's interesting, the plurality of Jesus' statement. He includes her in it. You know, it's not just me. What does this have to do with me? It's what does this have to do with us? And that also leads us to the thought, why was it important to her? What about this was important to Mary? Why did she go and tell Jesus this? Why? And Jesus seems a little harsh, right? What does that have to do with us? And it's really a lot harsher in the English and the translation than it is in the Greek. But I think probably the interesting statement in 4 is the hour that comes up here. This is so reoccurring in John's gospel, and this is the first time that we see it. My hour. There's a lot of speculation about what does that mean. The hour when he's supposed to perform miracles, the hour when he's supposed to start his ministry. He's already been baptized, right? He's baptized in John 1. John the Baptist baptized him. The Holy Spirit's already descended upon him. And now he comes up to this point, and he says, my hour's not yet come. And so there's a lot of speculation about that. What does that mean? What hour? You know, what's he waiting on? What's the hour? You know, if I say that to somebody, you know, my time's not come, you would think, well, I'm waiting on a specific event, right? I'm waiting on something to happen, therefore I can do what I'm supposed to do. If you look at John's gospel, this is used, and that direct terminology is used like 6 times in John's gospel. My hour, my hour, my hour. My hour's at hand. You know, he said, John's the only one that says this, but he says it repeatedly. Jesus says it repeatedly. My hour. You know, so when you look at this is early. This is early Jesus' ministry. This is the first sign that Jesus is going to perform. It's early within his ministry. And he says right here, my hour has not yet come. So it's a really interesting idea. Jesus almost seems a little put out, like, I shouldn't be doing what yet? I shouldn't be doing a miracle yet. I shouldn't be revealing myself as God's son yet. I shouldn't be what? You know, what hour? What's he waiting on? What is he doing? But then Mary, she gives all the authority to Jesus. You know, this is one of those cases where Mary steps in and says, we don't have it. He kind of rebukes her almost a little bit, you know. It's not time, my hour's not come. What does this have to do with us? You know, almost in some translations even harsher. It's almost like, why are you bothering me? You know, why are you bothering me with this? You know, this isn't important. This isn't something that I should be bothered with. You can kind of look at it that way, right? What do I have to do with it? What does it have to do with me? But the interesting thing is she gives this authority immediately to Jesus. Whatever he says to you, do it. That's a really big statement, because she's turning this over to Christ. She's turning it over to Jesus. At this point, she is no longer involved in this narrative. You know, it's one of those things, we really focus on Mary here, and she brings it in, she brings a statement, but then she backs away. She's not in the narrative anymore. She backs out of it. She goes, whatever Jesus says to do, that's what you need to do. She puts that authority in him to do what he's supposed to do. So there's a lot you can get into here, a lot of things. And trust me, there's books written about this miracle, because it's so out of character of what we consider Jesus' miracles to be, isn't it? Very out of character. I think we could all agree with that. You know, it's not something we see Jesus doing. So there's a question. Is he doing it just because Mary asked him to? Is he really bothered by this? Is he just doing it because it's his mother? You know, this is only 2 times in John's gospel, 2 times that Mary is really mentioned in John's gospel. Here and at the cross, where Jesus says, woman, behold thy son, son, behold thy mother, which is a very affectionate, right? Very affectionate at the cross. Very, very affectionate statement at the cross. And here it's almost kind of a harsh statement here. So she puts it, the authority within Christ. He never says he's going to do it in this. She basically just kind of puts him in that position, right? Puts him in that position. She wants it done. She knows he can do it. That's another big point in this story. You know, how does she know he can do this, right? I mean, he hasn't done any miracles yet. Hadn't done any that we know of here. He hasn't done anything yet. This is first thing, first out of the box. You know, there's no precedent been set. But yet Mary seems to have the understanding that Jesus is able to do this. And to me, that's one of the conundrums of the passage, if you want to, I like that word, conundrum. But it's a conundrum of the passage. You know, how does she know? Right? Because it appears Jesus was really, really regular before the Holy Spirit fell on him at the baptism of John. You know? Did she see that baptism? You know, the scripture doesn't say she was there. You know, did she hear about it? Did Jesus do something before this, possibly? Maybe? Yeah. Well, we'd have no indication of any miraculous thing before, you know, take away, you know, having great knowledge at the temple, but she wasn't even there for that. I mean, she might have heard about it. But we have no biblical account of Jesus doing anything miraculous before the baptism of John. Yeah. Right. And I mean, right. And if you look at the Gospels of his birth, you know, if you look, I can't remember if it's in Matthew or Luke, but it says she treasured all these things in her heart, you know. She treasured all these things in her heart. You know, it's too bad we don't know more about the first 30 years of Jesus' life, you know. I mean, it's too bad we don't have something. You know, truth is we have just almost nothing, really. We have just almost nothing. But she had confidence that he could do it. It's a miracle. She's asking Jesus to do a miracle here. She's asking him to do something that's not physically possible to do. She's asking him to perform a miracle, right? I mean, that's obvious here. She's not asking him to do this by conventional method. She's not saying run into town and buy some wine, right? I mean, this is not conventional. This is a miracle. She's asking Jesus to perform a miracle. His own mother has asked him for a miracle. What's interesting, the other thing I always think about when I get to this is, you know, we're 90% sure, I would say 100% sure that by the time Jesus begins his ministry at 30, that Joseph was probably dead. I mean, there's no indication that Joseph was still alive. I mean, I think if Joseph, especially in this society, if Joseph had still been alive, we would be seeing Joseph in this narrative and not just Mary. Not only that, at the cross, when Jesus was dying, and he made that statement, if Joseph was still alive, she wouldn't have needed to provide the care for his mother into another person's hands if Joseph had still been alive. If Joseph was dead, which I'm convinced that's true, Joseph was dead by the time that this occurred. You know, Jesus could have probably healed him. I mean, really, right? I mean, if he had the ability to do it, I mean, he probably could have healed him, right? And yet he didn't. So, you know, Jesus did miracles. Jesus, over and over, he says he did it because, even in John's gospel, he says, I only do the will of who? Of my Father in heaven, right? I only do the will of my Father, right? But yet this time it appears he did the will of his mother, you know, which is really kind of endearing in a way. Kind of gives you an idea of the humanity of Christ, you know, the idea that his mother, even though it seems harsh and you come away with this story that the idea that his mother and his mother's love and his relationship with his mother was something, and I think you see it throughout the Gospels, but it was something that he really valued. He valued her love. He valued her respect. She stayed with him, right? All the way to the end, right? Mary stayed with Jesus all the way to the cross. She followed him throughout all this. She saw all these. She's going to see all these tremendous miracles. She's going to see him at the cross. She's going to see the empty tomb. She's going to see Jesus resurrected. She's an amazing figure within history, right? John, historically, we know that John took her to Ephesus, and John provided her a house in Ephesus where she lived out the remainder of her life. John took care of her the remainder of her life. You ever thought about that? Jesus gave his mother's care to John, and John's the only apostle who died of old age. Most people think John was close to 100 years old when John died. He gave his care of his mother until the only apostle that was actually going to be alive to take care of his mother. No accident in that. Remember when Jesus, we'll look at that at the end of John, when Jesus fed him breakfast and then he left, and he says, if he remains until I come, what is that to you? He says to him, right? You know? And then John dies of old age. And when I went to Ephesus, I went to I don't know if it's really the house of Mary, but they say it's the house of Mary. You know, that apparently John provided to Mary for her to live out the remainder of her days. John honored what Jesus said to do. Jesus had an honor for his mother. You know, and that's a biblical Old Testament thought, isn't it? Honor thy father and mother, right? The only commandment, the promise, the Bible says, that you may live long. Your days may be long upon the earth, right? And he honored her, and I think it's important. Yeah, go ahead, Sam. Sure. Well, I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, they were told who he is. I mean, they should have known that. And I mean, even when they were in Bethlehem, 2 or 3 years after Jesus was born, the angel of the Lord appeared to him, appeared to Joseph and says, take the child and flee into Egypt. So, I mean, but as far as we know, biblically, that's the last time God spoke to either Mary or Joseph. We don't have any other account of God ever providing them with any additional information. Once they were in Egypt, and he said, go back to Nazareth because the one who seeks the child is dead, But after that discourse and them getting back to Nazareth, as far as we know, for years, as far as we know, God never intervened again with that. He was raised. And I think when you look at Jesus going back to Nazareth, me and you've had this conversation a bunch of times, but Jesus going back to Nazareth and, and them saying, isn't that the carpenter's son? The idea that the people that were around him, the people that grew up with him in his own town, to them, he was just the carpenter's son. There was nothing astounding about him. He was just the carpenter's son. It depends on how you read that passage. You can either read it to be, he's a carpenter, the son of the carpenter, or he's just a carpenter's son, but however you read the passage. We take Jesus to be a carpenter. The Greek's pretty ambiguous, but, we take Jesus for that to be his profession, and that's fine. But it really, they were going to throw him off the cliff, right? They gathered up to throw him off the cliff because they were convinced, he was claiming to be God. Wasn't that a great passage? He was claiming to be God, and they were convinced that he wasn't. There was nothing to convince them otherwise. So, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think, but on the other hand, it had to be hard for them. I can't imagine being the parents of Jesus. I think on one hand, all that happens and it's exciting, and in your mind, you're thinking this guy's going to be the king of Israel, this guy's going to rule, and on the other hand, you're raising him in the most nondescript, poor, out-of-the-way place on the face of the planet, and you're in this little town of Nazareth, with this little poor village that nobody goes to and nobody cares to go to, and he stays there, and then all of a sudden, 30 years later, all of a sudden, all this starts to happen. Like I said, we just don't have enough information. We're short on facts. I wish we had them, but we just don't. Yeah. Well, I think it speaks a lot for the humanity of Christ, not just the fact that he's God's son, that he's divine, but it gives you a lot of idea of the humanity, the human side. We all want to please our parents. I think any of us would try to do something for our mother, do something for our father. It really shows a lot of humanity. I think the other thing, and I think 6, and I don't know if you, do you know what a stone water pot is? Anybody know the difference? You know what that is? I mean, when I think of water pots in the Middle East, the picture in my head is pottery, right? Like you make on a wheel, and then you bake it and you make a pot, right? But that's not what this is. These are stone water pots. You know what those are? They're actually carved and chipped out of a piece of stone. Yeah, they're not like what we would consider to be like something like I picture, like on a potter's wheel. These things are actually hewn out of stone. And you say, well, Rex, what difference is that? Well, the difference is that they didn't have to be purified according to the laws of Deuteronomy. Regular water pots, like if anything fell into them, anything that was considered unclean, like if a bug fell into a pot that was like made on a wheel, in Jewish law, you had to destroy that pot. You couldn't clean it. It was impossible to clean it. You clean other stuff, but you couldn't clean a pot. I can't remember the exact passage, but you can look it up. But these didn't require that. So this is almost a rabbinical deal. These pots that don't have to be purified, stone pots. And these things, according to what I understand, and in this translation it tells you 20 to 30 gallons, 16 to 27 gallons is technically what these things hold. So that's pretty good volume, right? I mean, that's 20 gallon of water is, about 160 something pounds, right? Plus a stone pot. So that's pretty, that's at least a couple hundred pounds, right? Maybe more than that. So these are really big deals, and he says they filled them to the brim, right? There's a lot of speculation about the volume of this, why so much, How big was this wedding party? If you've got to have this much fluid, 6 pots at 30 gallons each, that's 180 gallons of wine. I mean, that's a bunch, right? So it kind of gives you an idea of the scope of this gathering, right? Scope of this gathering. And then he said, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. So there's no incantation here. There's no waving the hand. There's no praying. There's no anything here. This is just take it out and take it. This is real different. And I think a real break from what maybe people of that day were used to, even by magicians. Because magicians can do a lot of things. Even in Pharaoh, when Moses went to do things, the magicians would duplicate what Moses did. He would throw down a staff, and they would throw down their staff, and it would be a snake. They had the ability. Simon the sorcerer in Acts 8, they had the ability, but magicians always used a lot of flair. They always use words. They always make a scene, make a show. This is real plain, straightforward. Put in the water, draw it out. And the head waiter tasted the water which had become wine and did not know where it came from, right? And he called the bridegroom, and he said, everybody serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, they serve the poor wine, but you have kept the good wine until now. So a lot of speculation about this. I can give you books that tell you this was grape juice, and I'm telling you, this is one of those passages in the Bible that there's volumes written about this, everything you can imagine. But I think it's pretty obvious what's going on here. I don't think you have to read between the lines. This isn't about alcohol. This isn't about the wine. This is about a miracle. This is about Jesus providing abundance and providing quality, right? That's what you have to see in this. Jesus not only provided abundance, Jesus provided quality. In all Jesus' miracles, except one, Jesus always did it completely, 100%. They were 100% healed, 100% good wine, everything, plenty to eat. Every time Jesus fed multitudes, they took up extra. There was an abundance with Jesus. Never a want, never. And the quality was always perfect except for one miracle. The quality was always perfect. The lame man jumped to his feet, sprang to his feet, literally, is what the text says. You know, the blind man, except for one, saw completely, right? Could see clearly. Dead people were raised back to life. People who couldn't hear could hear. Lepers were completely cleansed, right? They didn't have a little bit left. Jesus didn't say, go for a while and it's going to get better over time. Don't you feel a little better? They were completely cleansed. This miracle is no different. It's complete. It's 100% complete. It's 100% quality and quantity. It's everything that Jesus provides. And there's great lessons. And Jesus, in this case, as in the case with feeding the multitudes, provides sustenance. It really goes into what John talks about the idea that Jesus is our sustenance. And Jesus provides that, not just in this case physically, but Jesus is our spiritual sustenance. There's a lot in this idea. This was the beginning of signs. John says signs. Remember that? I told you at the beginning of this. John does not like the word miracle. John doesn't like the word miracle. These are signs. Signs to point us towards the divinity of Jesus Christ. 7 signs in John's gospel. This is the first of 7 signs in John's gospel. John included only 7. And there's a reason, because every one of the ones he included, for some reason in John's thinking and the Holy Spirit's influence of John, these 7 signs became the ones that were included in this gospel because they were important to lead us to the idea of the divinity of Christ. And this is Christ having authority over non-material things, basically, over things that aren't living, basically. This is Jesus having that authority. In the Bible, when we talk about signs in the Bible, miracles like to heal somebody, that's kind of a sign. But generally, when you look for signs in the Bible, it's physical manifestation, okay? Like in the Old Testament, when Hezekiah wanted a sign that he was going to be healed. You think if he was healed, that would be the sign, right? I mean, you'd think God would just say, Hezekiah, he'd say, Hezekiah, if you don't die, then I healed you. That's the sign, right? Because he said he was going to die, right? Because he had this big sore. And you think God would have just went to Hezekiah and said, Hezekiah, if you wake up in the morning, the sore's gone? I did that, right? But instead of that, Hezekiah says, give me a sign. And so what did God do for Hezekiah? He said, you want the sun to go forward or go back? And what did Hezekiah say? 50-50 chance here. Hezekiah said it's an easy thing for the sun to go forward, so I want it to go back. 10 degrees on a sundial, right? I want it to go back. Physical sign. And so when God did that, when God made that sun go back, and then Hezekiah was healed, Hezekiah had to say, I was healed because of who? Right? Couldn't deny it. He couldn't get up in the morning and say, well, I guess that got better. Right? You know, at that time, he had to acknowledge God. He had to say, God healed me. God gave me a sign, and I'm healed. God healed me. So when we talk about physical signs in the Bible, when the Jews said, give us a sign, they didn't say, give us a miracle, right? Because you're thinking, man, Jesus has healed these people. He's raised the dead. The blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk. And then the Pharisees and the scribes went up to Jesus and they said, give us a sign. And Jesus says, an evil adulterous generation looks for a sign, but no sign will be given you but the sign of Jonah. Because Jonah was a physical sign. As Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of great fish, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. That's your sign. When I'm raised from the dead, you know that's me. That's your sign, you see. So we can't always think a miracle and a sign equal each other. We can't really think that. Because I think when people see a healing, you could always say, oh, well, maybe they got better, right? But if you actually see something that's physical, something that's of a fact of nature, you know, Jesus did all the miracles, but when he calmed that sea, Remember that in that story? And the sea's rough in the boat, and Jesus got up and he says, "Peace be still," and the sea became calm. And they said, "Even the wind and the waves obey his will." You know, to them, that sign was greater than healing somebody, because to them, there's no way anybody could do that. You know, there's no accident in that. It has to be God, it has to be Jesus. So that's why we say this. This is the beginning of signs. He manifests his glory. His disciples believed in him. And after this, he went to Capernaum, which is down by the sea. And his mother and his brothers and his disciples, they stayed there a few days. This is where we get into the cleansing of the temple. Now this brings up a bunch of questions. Are there any more questions about the wedding in Galilee? So this brings up a bunch of questions. The reason it does is because, well, there's a lot of things going on here. Number one, we get the 3 years of Jesus' ministry out of the Gospel of John. It doesn't come out of Matthew, Mark, or Luke, okay? 3-year ministry of Jesus comes out of John's Gospel. 2.5, 3 years ministry of Jesus exclusively comes out of the Gospel of John. And the reason that is because John counts Passovers, okay? And you'll see that as we go through this Gospel. This is the first Passover. In the middle, we're going to have another Passover. And at the end, right, we're going to have a third Passover. So John counts Passovers. That's how we say, okay, Jesus' ministry was 3 years, 3.5 years, however you want to figure that out. Because John counts, there's a Passover every year, and John counts Passovers. That's how we get that. If you take John's Passovers out of it, and you go to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you really have a hard time proving a 3-year ministry of Jesus or a timeline, because you just don't get it. But on the other hand, the problem is that John, according to most scholars and people who read the book, is very chronologically challenged. So even though John uses Passovers, people think John throws stories in out of order. In other words, they think John mixes things up. They think John's more worried about literary emphasis than he is on chronological sequence. So they think like Luke. Luke is an historian, right? Luke's a Gentile writer of the Bible that's a historian. And so when Luke writes as a historian, Luke tends to write things very chronological, right? Even if you look at the book of Acts, it's very chronologically sequenced. All this happens, right? This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. But John tends to take, if you look at it compared to the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he tends to take a lot of those stories and like that game of shells on the table, he kind of mixes them up a little bit because people think he wants to have some literary emphasis. So this is a problem. Why is this a problem? Because only in John's gospel is this at the beginning. You see, John's gospel, it really flips. I always look at it like this. There's a point where all of a sudden Jesus is going to the cross in all these gospels. There comes a point in the gospel, in the story, if you read the story, just like any good book, there's a point that's kind of the climax of the plot, right? The climax of the plot. And you know when that happens, things are going to change. In the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the climax of the plot is the cleansing of the temple in Jerusalem. Jesus comes back in, triumphal entry. Jews love him, everybody loves him. He goes into the temple, he throws everything over, makes everybody mad, everybody hates him, and they're going to kill him, right? But John cleanses the temple at the very, very beginning, first Passover, right? John's pivot, climax of the story, is the raising of Lazarus, which no other gospel includes, which always amazed me. And we'll have to get into that because I always thought that was maybe the greatest miracle Jesus ever performed. And why is it only in John? I'm not going to answer that question. We got to get there. But John says In John's gospel, it's when he raises Lazarus that all of a sudden the scribes and the Pharisees and all go back to Jerusalem and say, we got to kill this guy. So John's climax of the story is the raising of Lazarus. After the raising of Lazarus, Jesus was going to the cross. Plain and simple. They're going to kill him. In the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, cleansing of the temple. That's the pivot. But in John, cleansing of the temple, beginning. Okay? So some people say, listen, Rex, you know John is chronologically challenged. You know John takes stories and mixes them up and puts them where he wants to put them to give emphasis. So it's just really simple. Jesus only did this one time. The gospel writers put it where it's supposed to be at the end. And John, because John is chronologically challenged individual, John decided he wants to stick it at the beginning. Well, that's one answer. I don't agree with it, but that's one answer. But some scholars say, okay, listen, he did it twice. But if you say he did it twice, then you have to say why. Why did he do it twice? And if he did it once, why did they let him do it again? Right? I mean, it looks like they've been looking out for this crazy guy a second time around. You know what I'm saying? You know, we ain't going to let that guy back in here. He threw all the tables over. You know, we're banning him from the temple. You're going to let him in. You know? But I guess there's explanations for that too. So I want to try to compare this to Deuteronomy 14, because I think that's the key to understanding this passage. So this is a Passover. We're never going to get through this, but we'll start. So this is the first Passover, Jesus' first Passover. Jesus goes to Jerusalem, and every good Jew goes to Jerusalem for Passover. I mean, that's what you do. You know, that's where you go, right? He goes up there, and he found in the temple those who were selling oxen, sheep, doves, and money changers seated at their tables. If you go tonight or this week, and you set this cleansing next to Matthew, Mark, and Luke and read them, you're going to see Matthew, Mark, and Luke look a lot alike. This is a little different. This is a little different. No scourge of cords in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. No scourge of cords there. He just overturned them. Didn't drive them out. He went in and overturned. You can look at that for yourself, but they do read different. Let's just read this. He made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business. And his disciples remembered it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. And the Jews said to him, look again, John, what sign do you show us? What sign? Not miracle, different word. What sign do you show us that your authority? And Jesus gives them a sign. And look at the sign. It's not a miracle, it's physical. Destroy the temple. Do you see this? Do you see what I'm trying to say here? Miracles aren't signs in their thought. He says, I'm going to give you a physical sign. I'm going to destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And the Jews says it took 46 years to build this temple. This is Herod's temple. Okay, so the first temple, Solomon, right? We all know that. Solomon builds a temple. Babylonians come in and tear it all down. Ezra and Nehemiah come back in and build the second temple. Okay? The second temple is not anything like Solomon's temple. It's like going from the Taj Mahal to the Days Inn. You know what I'm saying? It ain't like it. You know, because it didn't have the resources that Solomon had, you know. And so what happens is Herod comes along. Wait, this is before, Jesus 30. He started building this temple 15, 20 years before Jesus was ever born. Herod comes along and says, I'm going to rebuild this temple, not because he loves the Jews, but because he wants to keep them on his side. So Herod comes along and says, I'm going to rebuild this temple. So Herod rebuilds a temple called Herod's temple. That's what he's talking about. Okay, so the temple was never not there. After the second temple was there. But when Herod started to rebuild it, and they called it Herod's temple, that's what we're talking about at the time of Jesus. Just little historical deal going on there. And he was still working on it when Jesus was alive. And they didn't finish it until after Jesus was raised from the dead. It was, 10, 12 years after Jesus was on the earth that the temple was actually finished. So when Jesus was there in Jerusalem, they were still building the temple. They were still working on like the grounds and the outer courts. So they worked on this temple for like 60 years. So this is a big deal. That's just a little historical. You get that for free. And so in 3 days I'll raise up. And Jesus said it took 46 years, and you will raise up in 3 days. But he's not speaking of the temple, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus spoke to them. And what did Jesus tell him? He says, no sign will be given you but the sign of Jonah the prophet is 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah's in the belly of the great fish. So shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. And that's the sign he told them in John at the beginning of this, exact same sign. Why? Because it's a physical sign. You see? Oh, it's miraculous. Don't get me wrong. It's a miraculous thing. But it's a physical sign. 3 days, I will tear this temple. They said, you can't, how are you going to do this? 46 years, Jesus said, I'm talking about my body. And this is really significant when we get into what I'm going to try to tell you in this passage. And we're just about out of time. But if you read this and put it next to them this week and just kind of look at the differences, I think we sing next Wednesday anyway. Deuteronomy 14. We're really going to tie this into Deuteronomy 14. I never had done that before, but when I started kind of putting that together, it really kind of made more sense why there were two. But I think one interesting thing before we're just about a minute, but one really interesting thing before I let you go, something I think the most kind of poignant thing in this whole discourse to me, when we specifically talk about this, is this scourge of cords. You know, I think about, anger. Jesus was angry because of this, but he wasn't in a rage. And I think sometimes when we look at this, and we look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we think, Jesus just walked in and said, I've had enough, because that's something Rex would do, I've had enough, I'm going to destroy this place. But what you see in this is this wasn't a fit of rage. This was premeditated anger, And I think it's righteous anger. And I think when you look at one thing I always really take out of this passage, because I have a lot of anger issues, one thing I always really take out of this passage is that anger, and I think the Bible backs that up, anger within itself is not sinful. It's okay to be mad about things. You can be mad about things. I think there's a lot of things on the earth we ought to be really mad about. I mean, I believe that. I think there's things going on every day in our world that ought to just infuriate us as Christians. And I think anger is not a sin. But Jesus premeditated this. And I don't know how long it takes to make a scourge of cords. I've never done that. I don't know how you do that. And I don't know if that takes 30 minutes or 2 days to do that. I don't know. But whatever it is, Jesus took the time. He didn't just walk in there and find something and start beating people. And I don't think he ever beat anybody. I don't think it shows that. Jesus was premeditated in this. He was premeditated in this anger. It was something he went in to make a point, right? He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't out of control. He wasn't throwing a fit. He knew exactly the point he was trying to make. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had premeditated it within his mind. It never says that he hurt anybody. It never says that he damaged anybody. It never says actually that he destroyed anything. He simply turned over the tables. He spilled their belongings. He let some animals go. Doesn't say that he ever damaged anybody, that he ever damaged any property, that he ever hurt a person here, because that was never his intent. He was premeditated. He was angry. He went in to make a point, and he made a point. I mean, now the question we have to ask is, why? Why? Because you know what? That and the temple, him building the temple back and this temple being the body, all this ties together. Why did he do this? Because it's not going to change them. They're going to put them tables back up. They're going to start selling that again. They're going to, by the time he gets out of that temple, they're already putting their stuff back up and going back to work. He's not going to change anything. He didn't do it to change it because he's not going to change them. It's not why he did it. But he had a purpose. And next time we have this class, I'm going to divulge it to you. So thanks for your attention. Hope you've enjoyed this. Have a good week.